The wooden gavel struck so hard that the entire room went silent. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged courtroom, bouncing off the walls and landing in the pit of everyone's stomach. People froze mid-whisper, mid-breath, mid-thought. Something was about to happen, something no one could have predicted. All eyes turned to the massive double doors at the back. Slowly, they creaked open. A small figure stepped in. It wasn't a lawyer in a crisp suit or a detective with important evidence. No, it was a boy, no older than 12. His suit was slightly oversized, clearly borrowed from someone else. The sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal his small wrists, and his tie was slightly crooked, like he had tried to tie it himself. His shoes were scuffed, not the polished leather you'd expect in a courtroom. But none of that mattered, because his eyes burned with something stronger than any lawyer's credentials: determination. The room filled with murmurs. Who is this kid? Is this some kind of prank? Why is there a child in the courtroom? The judge, a stern man with years of experience, squinted in confusion. Who are you? He asked, his deep voice cutting through the whispers. The boy stopped walking. He looked up at the towering judge, took a deep breath, and spoke clearly. My name is Malik Johnson, he said, his voice not shaking even once. The opposing attorney, a tall man in a navy blue suit, smirked and leaned back in his chair. He was certain this was some sort of joke. A child in a courtroom? Representing someone? Impossible. But Malik wasn't joking. He clutched a stack of papers tightly in his small hands, the edges slightly bent from how long he had been holding them. Each paper had been studied, highlighted, and organized by him. He walked to the front, his steps small but confident, as if he had practiced this very moment in his mind 100 times. And Malik paused, letting the suspense hang in the air. He could feel dozens of eyes piercing into him. Even his mother, sitting nervously behind him, was holding her breath. I am my mom's lawyer. The words struck the room like thunder. Gasps erupted around the courtroom. Reporters in the back scrambled to jot down notes. A woman in the audience covered her mouth in shock. Even the court stenographer momentarily froze, her fingers hovering over the keys. The opposing attorney chuckled under his breath, whispering to his client, "This will be easy." But Malik heard him. He turned his head slightly, meeting the man's eyes, and in that brief moment, there was no trace of fear, only fire. The judge leaned forward, intrigued but cautious. Your mom's lawyer? Malik nodded firmly. Yes, Your Honor. My mother has chosen me to speak on her behalf. The judge glanced at Angela Johnson, Malik's mother. She sat trembling in her chair, clutching a tissue. Her eyes were glossy with tears, but when Malik spoke those words, something inside her shifted. Pride began to replace fear. Ma'am, the judge asked, is this true? You are allowing this boy to represent you? Angela stood up slowly. Yes, Your Honor, she said softly but with conviction. My son is smarter than anyone I know. He knows this case inside and out. I trust him with my life and with my home. The judge raised an eyebrow. This was highly unusual. In fact, it was almost unheard of. But something about the boy's unwavering stance, the way he held those papers like they were his sword and shield, made the judge hesitate to dismiss him. Very well, the judge said finally. I'll allow you to speak for now. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let it show. He adjusted the papers in his hand and took a step closer to the bench. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every pair of eyes was locked on him. Behind him, Angela clasped her hands tightly. She had never felt more terrified, yet more proud in her entire life. This was her son, the same boy who used to defend his friends on the playground, the same boy who once said he wanted to change the world. Today, he wasn't just a boy. Today, he was a fighter. The opposing attorney leaned back, smirking, whispering to his assistant, "This will be over in 5 minutes." But deep down, Malik knew something they didn't. He wasn't there to play games. He wasn't there to win for glory. He was there to fight for the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. And he wasn't leaving that courtroom without giving it everything he had. The gavel rested silently on the judge's desk. The entire room waited. Malik took one more deep breath, looked the judge straight in the eye, and prepared to speak. What no one knew at that moment was that this young boy was about to change the course of the trial, and maybe even the law, forever. Just 2 weeks earlier, Malik's life had been perfectly ordinary. He was a bright 12-year-old who loved reading mystery novels, playing basketball with his friends, and helping his mom with chores after school. But all of that changed the day he came home and found his mom sitting at the kitchen table with her head buried in her hands. The table was covered with papers, rent receipts, bank statements, and an eviction notice stamped in bold red letters. The sight of his strong, hard-working mother crying shattered Malik's heart. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, dropping his school bag. Angela Johnson, a dedicated nurse who worked double shifts to provide for her only son, tried to wipe her tears away and force a smile. "It's nothing, baby. Just some mix-up with the landlord," she said. But her voice cracked, and Malik knew it was more than just a mix-up. After a few minutes, she told him everything. Their landlord, Mr. Grayson, was suing her, claiming she hadn't paid rent for several months. The truth was, Angela had receipts for every payment. But Mr. Grayson had a plan. He wanted to evict her so he could rent the apartment at a higher price to someone else. Angela had called several attorneys, hoping one would take the case, but the legal fees were astronomical. "They're asking for thousands of dollars just to start," she said with a defeated sigh. "I don't have that kind of money, Malik. I don't know what we're going to do." For the first time in his life, Malik saw his mother truly hopeless. And that's when something sparked inside him, a mix of anger, love, and determination. That night, as Angela sat staring at the eviction notice, Malik approached her and wrapped his small arms around her shoulders. "Mom," he said firmly, "don't worry. I'll fight for you. I'll be your lawyer." Angela let out a small laugh through her tears, thinking it was just her son's sweet way of cheering her up. "That's very brave of you, Malik. But this isn't a school project. This is real life." But Malik wasn't joking. The very next morning, instead of playing video games after school, he headed straight to the public library. He found a quiet corner and opened his laptop, typing tenant rights in wrongful eviction cases. He spent hours reading legal blogs, court cases, and state housing laws. At first, it was overwhelming, all those big words and complicated rules. But Malik didn't give up. Every day, he stayed at the library until closing. He took pages of notes, highlighting important points and drawing diagrams to understand how the legal system worked. He even started watching courtroom videos online, mimicking how real lawyers argued their cases. The librarian, Mrs. Sanders, noticed the boy's dedication. "You've been here every day this week," she said kindly. "What are you working on?" Malik hesitated, then told her everything. "My mom's being evicted for something she didn't do. We can't afford a lawyer, so I'm learning how to be one." Mrs. Sanders was stunned, but she admired his determination. She began helping him, guiding him toward the right law books and showing him where to find online resources. "You have a brave heart, Malik," she said with a smile. "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do this." At home, Malik practiced every night. He stood in front of the mirror, pretending to be in court. "Objection, Your Honor," he would say, pointing his finger just like the lawyers he saw in videos. He rehearsed arguments, memorized tenant laws, and studied every piece of evidence his mother had saved. Angela watched her son working tirelessly, and while part of her wanted to stop him, another part of her was deeply touched. She could see how serious he was. He wasn't just playing make-believe. He was preparing for battle. Each day, Malik grew more confident. He organized his mother's receipts, carefully placing them in labeled folders. He found discrepancies in the landlord's claims, noting down dates and laws that proved his mother was right. One night, Angela walked into the living room and found Malik asleep on the couch, surrounded by open law books and papers. She gently covered him with a blanket, her eyes filling with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. "This boy," she whispered to herself, "has more courage than most grown men." The days passed quickly, and soon the court date was approaching. Malik had prepared everything: evidence, statements, and even a closing argument. On the night before the trial, Angela sat beside her son. "Malik," she said softly, "you've already done more for me than I could ever ask. Even if we lose, I'm proud of you." Malik looked at her, his eyes steady and serious. "We're not going to lose, Mom. Not this time." That night, he didn't sleep much. He stayed up going over every detail one last time. Because deep down, Malik knew this wasn't just about winning a case. This was about protecting the person he loved the most. And when morning came, he put on the suit that was slightly too big for him, straightened his tie, and walked out the door with his mom. He wasn't just going to court. He was going to war. The morning of the trial arrived, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Malik and his mother walked up the courthouse steps hand in hand. Angela's heart raced with anxiety, but Malik's steps were steady, each one echoing his determination. He wore the same slightly oversized suit, the same scuffed shoes, but to him, it felt like armor. When they entered the courtroom, Malik noticed something unusual. It was packed. Not only were the landlord, his attorney, and the judge present, but also dozens of spectators. News had spread about a 12-year-old who was going to represent his mother in court. Court clerks, curious lawyers, and even a few local reporters had gathered to witness this extraordinary event. Angela squeezed her son's shoulder. "Are you sure you want to do this, Malik?" she whispered. Malik turned to her, his eyes sharp with confidence. "Mom, I've been ready since the day this started." The judge entered, and everyone rose. He was a seasoned man with a stern face, the kind who rarely smiled. As he sat down and struck his gavel, the courtroom hushed. "Case of Johnson versus Grayson. Parties, step forward," he announced. Angela and Malik walked to the front, while the landlord and his attorney strutted confidently to the opposite side. The landlord smirked at Malik, as if to say, "This is going to be easy." Before anything else, the judge peered over his glasses at the boy. "Son, this is highly unusual. Are you aware that only licensed attorneys can represent someone in court?" Malik held up a paper, his mother's signed affidavit. "Yes, Your Honor. My mother has the right to represent herself, and she has chosen me to speak on her behalf." The judge raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected. He looked at Angela, who nodded firmly, confirming her consent. "Very well," the judge said cautiously. "I will allow this for now." That's when the landlord's attorney laughed. "This is ridiculous, Your Honor. This boy is not qualified." But before he could finish, Malik raised his hand. "Objection," he said, his voice loud and confident. The courtroom gasped. Nobody expected a child to know how to use courtroom language. Malik continued, "My mom has the legal right to represent herself. She has chosen me to speak for her. The law allows her to have an advocate, and I have the facts, the evidence, and the law on my side." The judge leaned back, intrigued. He couldn't help but smile slightly. "I'll allow it. Proceed, young man." Malik took a deep breath, stepped forward, and began his presentation. His hands trembled slightly at first, but as he spoke, his confidence grew. He opened a folder and presented each piece of evidence with precision. "Exhibit A," he said, holding up a receipt. "Proof of payment for the month of March." He walked to the judge's bench and handed it over. "Exhibit B, proof of April's payment." One by one, he laid out every receipt, every bank statement, every record showing that his mother had paid her rent on time. The landlord's attorney tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, these documents." "Objection," Malik said again, not missing a beat. "The documents speak for themselves. They are original bank-issued receipts, not copies. They prove payments were made." The judge nodded, impressed by the boy's composure. Then Malik moved to the landlord's evidence. "Now let's talk about the documents presented by the other side," Malik said, walking toward the defense table. "Notice anything strange?" He held up a paper the landlord had submitted. "This eviction notice is dated May 5th, but the stamp is from May 12th. That means it wasn't delivered on time, which violates Tenant Law Section 46.2. The audience murmured. Even the landlord's attorney looked uncomfortable. Malik flipped through another document. "And here, this so-called late notice has no signature from the landlord, as required by law. It's invalid." The judge leaned forward to examine the document. "Is this true?" he asked the landlord. The landlord stammered. Well, there must have been a mistake." Malik pressed on, his confidence now unshakable. "Mistake or not, the law protects my mother. The landlord cannot evict her based on false or incomplete evidence. And not only that," Malik paused dramatically, "this eviction attempt violates the housing code because it was done in bad faith. He wants to remove my mom so he can raise the rent illegally." The judge's expression hardened. The landlord's attorney quickly objected, but Malik was ready. "Your Honor, this isn't speculation. I have a recorded statement from one of the tenants who overheard the landlord bragging about raising rents after forcing us out." Gasps filled the courtroom. Malik handed over the written statement, signed and notarized. The judge read it carefully, then looked at the landlord with a cold glare. Every time the opposing attorney tried to counter, Malik fired back with facts, citing laws and pointing out inconsistencies. The boy spoke with the confidence of someone far beyond his years, and with every word, the case against his mother crumbled. The courtroom was silent except for Malik's voice, clear and commanding. Even seasoned lawyers in the audience exchanged looks of disbelief. By the time Malik finished presenting the evidence, the landlord was sweating, the attorney looked defeated, and the spectators were on the edge of their seats. The tension in the courtroom grew thicker with every passing minute. What had started as a simple eviction case had now turned into a dramatic showdown. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, hanging on to every word. Even the judge, who had remained calm and stoic throughout, seemed visibly invested in the outcome. As the case continued, Malik's confidence only grew. Every piece of evidence the landlord's attorney tried to present was dismantled by Malik's sharp observations. Each time he spoke with clarity and purpose, leaving no room for doubt. The landlord, who had walked in with a smug expression, now wiped sweat from his forehead. His hands fidgeted nervously with his tie, and his eyes darted toward his attorney as if silently pleading for help. But the attorney himself was struggling. Malik's arguments were not just good, they were airtight. Then came the moment that would change everything. Malik walked toward the evidence table, holding up a paper that the landlord had submitted as proof of eviction. He raised it high for everyone to see. "Your Honor," Malik said, his voice steady, "this so-called evidence from the landlord is a forged notice." The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Malik continued. "The law clearly states that an eviction notice must be hand-delivered to the tenant and signed by the landlord or their authorized agent. This one is neither. There is no delivery signature, no official stamp, and the date on this document doesn't even match the timeline required by law." He walked confidently to the judge's bench and handed the document over. The judge adjusted his glasses and examined it carefully. His eyebrow arched as he looked back at the landlord. "Mr. Grayson, is this true?" the judge asked, his tone sharp. The landlord shifted uncomfortably. Well, there must have been a clerical error. Maybe the stamp." Malik interrupted, his voice cutting through the landlord's excuse like a knife. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is not a clerical error. This is an attempt to deceive the court and force my mom out of her home." The audience erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Some even shook their heads, amazed at the boy's courage. The landlord's attorney stood, trying to regain control. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He's a child, not an expert. Surely this is—" But Malik turned to him with a calm but firm tone. "You don't need to be an expert to read the law. And the law is clear." The judge banged his gavel lightly to restore order, but his eyes remained fixed on the landlord, who was now visibly sweating. Still, Malik wasn't done. He turned back to the judge, holding his notes tightly. His voice carried not just facts, but emotion that gripped everyone in the room. "Your Honor," Malik began, his tone softer now, but full of conviction. "My mom works day and night as a nurse. She takes care of strangers, saving lives, helping people who need her. She paid her rent every single month, on time. She followed every rule, every law. And yet, she's here, fighting for her home because someone wants to take it away for their own profit." Angela's eyes filled with tears as she watched her son speak. She had never felt prouder in her entire life. "This eviction isn't just unfair," Malik continued, his voice rising. "It's illegal, and I will not let anyone, take our home from us." The room was silent. Every word seemed to hang in the air, weighing heavily on everyone's hearts. Even the court reporter paused for a split second, caught up in the emotion of the moment. The judge looked at Malik, then at Angela, and finally at the landlord. His face was unreadable, but his eyes spoke volumes. The opposing attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing the case was slipping away from them. The landlord tried to speak again, but no words came out. The audience remained frozen, watching the drama unfold as if it were a movie. Finally, the judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He studied the boy for a long moment, almost as if he were trying to process what had just happened. Malik stood silently, waiting, his chin slightly raised. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Every single person there knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A 12-year-old boy standing up not only to a greedy landlord, but also to a system that often crushed those without power. And in that moment, everyone realized the case had already shifted. The landlord's lies had been exposed, and Malik had captured not only the court's attention but its respect. The turning point had arrived, and there was no going back. The courtroom remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Malik stood at the center, gripping his papers tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. Angela's hands trembled as she clutched her tissue, praying for a miracle. The landlord stared at the floor, knowing the tide had turned against him. Even the audience held their breath, waiting for the judge to deliver his final decision. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his voice firm and commanding. "I have heard enough," he said, pausing just long enough for the tension to reach its peak. The court rules in favor of Angela Johnson. For a moment, there was stunned silence. And then, the room erupted with cheers. Angela gasped, tears streaming down her face as she covered her mouth in shock. Malik turned to her, and before he could say a word, she pulled him into the tightest hug she had ever given him. She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe, but he didn't care. This was the hug of victory, of relief, of love. "My baby," she cried, "you did it. You really did it." The judge, who was known for being strict and serious, actually smiled. He looked directly at Malik and said, "Young man, you have a bright future ahead of you. Perhaps you should consider becoming a lawyer for real one day." The audience erupted into applause again. Some even stood up, clapping for the boy who had just done the impossible. The court clerk whispered, "That's one for the history books." Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail of this extraordinary case. The landlord's face turned pale as the judge continued. "Furthermore, Mr. Grayson, you are ordered to pay damages for this false eviction attempt. Your actions were not only unethical, they were illegal." The landlord hung his head in shame as he quickly exited the courtroom, humiliated. His attorney followed, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Meanwhile, Malik and his mother were surrounded by people congratulating them. Strangers shook Malik's hand, telling him he was an inspiration. One elderly woman said with tears in her eyes, "You reminded us what true courage looks like." Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust toward the boy who had just beaten the system. Reporters shouted questions. "How does it feel to win, Malik? What gave you the courage to face an experienced attorney? Are you planning to become a lawyer one day?" Malik, still holding his mother's hand, spoke calmly to the cameras. "I didn't do it because I wanted to be famous. I did it because I love my mom. And when you love someone, you fight for them no matter what." That simple sentence touched everyone who heard it. Clips of his statement spread across TV channels and social media platforms. Within hours, the story went viral. People everywhere were talking about the young lawyer and the boy who beat the system. Lawyers across the state began reaching out, offering to mentor Malik for free. Some even offered scholarships for when he grew older. Local schools invited him to speak to students about standing up for what's right. Malik became a symbol of determination, showing that age doesn't define courage. Angela, watching her son being celebrated, couldn't stop smiling through her tears. "I always knew he was special," she told reporters. "But today he showed the world just how special he really is." In the following weeks, Malik continued to live his life as an ordinary kid, but with a newfound sense of purpose. He kept studying the law, reading even more than before. Teachers noticed a spark in him. He was no longer just a student. He was a leader in the making. Years later, people would still talk about that day. They would tell the story of the little boy who walked into a courtroom filled with adults, stood up against injustice, and won. They would say how he didn't just save his home. He inspired thousands to believe in themselves. That day, Malik proved that courage and determination can be stronger than any obstacle, no matter how big. And to this day, people still remember the young boy who walked into a courtroom and changed everything. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear suits that are just a little too big and carry a heart full of love.